Well, I was 23 years old and I just graduated from the Architectural Association in London, and I was broke. I was about to get married and I was looking for a job, and somebody said that there was this guy called Norman Foster who was looking for an assistant. So I said, okay, I'll go for a job interview. So it was Norman and his first wife, Wendy, who was there part of the time. There was a secretary, Sally, and I think that was about it. So it was a very small office, and it was in a flat in Hampstead in North London. Anyhow, I got the job, and I started working there. I was just, massively impressed with his dynamism and his sense of purpose. I think within probably the first week that I was there, Norman said to me one day, "Tomorrow you need to put on a suit in the morning." I had one suit that I was married in, so I put on this dark grey suit and arrived at the office at 9 o'clock, and drawings that I'd been preparing for a meeting all had to go into black books. Everything was kind of presentable, presentable and standardized. And then, we rushed downstairs, and Norman shoved me into the seat of his Lotus, which was essentially a racing car but with two seats. And we drove to Darby on the motorway with the top down, my hair all over the place, at about 100 miles an hour. Had a meeting for an hour in Darby, and we're back well before lunch. And I thought, my God, this is the kind of speed that we're operating at in this office. And there was that amazing kind of drive and sense of purpose. What was really interesting was new for me, was the idea of collaboration. And we talked a lot about the idea about multidisciplinary design. I mean, this was, it was very much a kind of group culture, and everybody would design around the table. And engineers, specialist designers and so on, everybody had an equal status in terms of inputting into the design, developing the design, and developing ideas. But this was really interesting. And to hear engineers talk about design was, was a completely new thing, a breath of fresh air, really. The principal one that I worked on was the Newport School Competition. It was a project which helped the practice develop specific ways of putting together a design for a building. At that time, the building was just expressed as it was, as a kind of industrial system. And I suspect, again, Norman had the the kind of confidence to do that because of what he and Richard had been working on in Reliance Controls. So the Newport School Competition, our scheme was incredibly simple. It was a floating plateau of a roof within which elements could be moved and changed around and so on and so forth. And it was just literally a long rectangle which could be expanded and could be changed over time. So flexibility, adaptability and expansion were the words that kept on being repeated. But what it gave you was a building that was very porous, transparent, spatially open and so on, and open to the outside too. So it was a terribly simple scheme. If you look at the drawings, I mean, the elevation is almost just a line on the landscape. And the plan is almost like a kind of spreadsheet. It's a kind of systematic matrix, a kind of tartan grid, which everything sits into. So it was pursued with clarity and a kind of ruthless clarity, really. So I learnt, I think, again working with the team, I learned how to work with those kind of ideas and concepts, which have stayed with me actually. And I think, the fundamental thing about that, which is like all good buildings have a very clear diagram. But I think, this was it was a fantastic way to start in architecture. I have always greatly admired Stansted Airport, which I think was a key project, which in some ways one can trace back some of the ideas to the Newport School Competition, because Stansted itself is a very simple plateau of a building with this very beautifully developed tree structure. But certainly I remember when in its early days, just the idea of this, going to an airport for once was an uplifting, joyful experience, which is not, does not occur that often. The architecture was helping you to move around the space, Didn't need all the kind of signage and the corridors and so on and so forth. I thought that was a real masterpiece.